Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 740, and today is January 6th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. I have a lot of news to get through on today's show. It was a very busy weekend, and so we will be breaking all that down today. Just do me a favor and head on over to the Kyle Anzalone show and subscribe to the all new channel. I will be recording another episode of that show today, out later tonight, so subscribe so you don't miss it. All right, let's get into the news today. The first story we have up here: Zelensky believes Trump will be decisive and capable of stopping Putin. I wrote this article for antiwar.com on January 3rd. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky indicated that he expects to continue to receive support from Washington after Donald Trump enters the White House later this month. Trump's return to the Oval Office has been a source of anxiety for some of Kiev's backers, as the president-elect has pledged to bring the war in Ukraine to a close. In an interview with a British tabloid, Zelensky explained, "Trump can be decisive. For us, this is the most important thing." He qualifies his qualities are indeed there. He can be decisive in this war. He is capable of stopping Putin, or put it in fairly, to help us stop Putin. He is able to do this. While it is unclear what Zelensky believes Trump will do, the main criticism of the Joe Biden administration's Ukraine policy is the White House has been too indecisive regarding major military aid boosts, such as sending F-16s or Abrams tanks to Kiev. The critics argue that by the time the weapon systems reach Ukraine, it is too late in the war. Zelensky's optimism about the incoming Trump administration stands in contrast to many of Kiev's backers in NATO. During the final year of the Biden presidency, the White House, Congress, and NATO members were to do what they labeled Trump-proof Washington support for Kiev, which means that try to set it up so that Trump cannot alter the support that Ukraine is getting, so that the elected president, the man elected president of the United States to dictate policy by the American people, is unable to change the policy of the previous president. This is, of course, a direct assault against democracy, but on January 6th, I guess we're not supposed to be thinking about that. All right, so on the campaign trail, Trump pledged to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office, often expressing concern over the large number of human lives lost in the conflict. However, Trump has not articulated a plan to end the war, and was instrumental in rallying Republican support to pass a $61 billion aid package for Kiev in April. Since winning the election in November, Trump has tapped a large number of hawks to join his administration. Both incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and envoy to the Ukraine war Keith Kellogg have expressed support for the Biden administration's decision to escalate military support for Kiev post-election. This includes Washington aiding Ukrainian forces in strikes deep into Russian territory with U.S. missiles. Such attacks explicitly cross Moscow's nuclear red lines. Zelensky's belief that Trump may stop Putin could be driven by a report last month in the Financial Times that Trump will continue to provide aid to Ukraine. The outlet explained, in a boost for allies deeply concerned over their ability to support Ukraine without Washington's backing, Trump now intends to maintain U.S. military supplies to Kiev after his inauguration. And look, Zelensky's optimism could be completely misdirected here and just completely unfounded, or it could be that he, understands what's going to happen in the Trump administration and is preparing accordingly. Now, this is very interesting. This one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 5th. Ukraine orders new offensive in Kursk after U.S. recommends retreat. So Ukraine doubled down on its offensive into Russia by ordering its forces to take more Russian territory. The new push follows Washington counseling Kiev to retreat from Russian territory before its forces are encircled. On Sunday, the Russian Defense Ministry said at around 9 a.m. Moscow time, in order to stop the offensive by Russian troops in the Kursk direction, the enemy launched a counterattack by assault detachment consisting of 2 tanks, 1 counter-obstacle vehicle, and 12 armored fighting vehicles. Ukrainian officials also unofficially confirmed the offensive. So South Front reported that Ukrainian forces captured some forested territory from the Russians, but other than that, their counterattack was repelled. In August, Kiev launched a surprise offensive against lightly defended Russian territory, seizing a large portion of the Kursk Oblast. After the initial Ukrainian push, Russian forces slowly recaptured about half of the territory from Ukraine. The AP reports that Russian gains had demoralized the Ukrainian forces. Recently, the Russian offensive has been making more progress. At the end of December, the White House told Ukrainian leaders to pull their forces from Ukraine before their retreat was cut off. And so this is really interesting, right? You have Washington giving Kiev a recommendation and then Kiev explicitly doing the opposite. Now, there's 2 possibilities here. I think one is that Zelensky really believes he's going to get more support from Trump than he has from Biden. And so there's a possibility that he's operating under the assumption that Trump is going to put a lot of pressure on Putin to negotiate and continue to support Ukraine with more arms. And so Ukraine will be able to hold on to this territory and then exchange it later at the negotiating table. I think if that is his thinking, it is misguided and likely to be another failure for Ukraine. The other possibility is that this was done in coordination with the White House, and maybe the White House planted that initial story, I believe it was in the New York Times, in order to have Russia let their guard down, make Russia think that the Ukrainians are preparing for a retreat, and then they go in and they conduct an offensive. Now, one of the reasons this may not be the case is the fighting in Kursk has been escalating and also escalating tensions between Moscow and Washington. So on Friday, Ukraine used U.S.-provided ATACMS missiles at a Russian base in the Belgorod Oblast, and that is a neighboring oblast to Kursk. And so it seems that maybe that attack was to try to set up this counteroffensive, which would, maybe indicate that this wasn't as much of a surprise as would be suggested if the White House was planting stories in the New York Times. The new offensive comes as Kiev is pushing its Western backers for more air defensive. Zelensky said on Saturday, "We will discuss this with them and continue to persuade them. The task remains unchanged, strengthen our air defensive." And there's a big meeting this week of all of Zelensky's supporters in Germany. The U.S. will be there. And my guess is that the U.S. is going to announce a bunch of weapons transfers to Ukraine. And it's important to note that this meeting was supposed to take place around the same time that hurricane hit North Carolina. And I believe that the Biden administration likely curtailed some of the support to Ukraine, believing that would really upset the American people if more money was going to the Ukrainians while the people of North Carolina were suffering so egregiously. And I don't think those dynamics have really changed. The White House probably thinks they have the political cover to now go ahead and give that aid to the Ukrainians, and they're running out of time. So I'm guessing we're going to see some massive aid packages for Ukraine come out later this week. All right, next up here, this one from January 4th at antiwar.com. I wrote this one: White House to approve massive weapons sale to Israel. So before President Joe Biden leaves office, he will approve one more massive arms sale to Israel. The $8 billion sale of missiles and artillery shells comes as human rights groups have labeled Israel's war in Gaza as a genocide. So Axios reported on Friday, the State Department notified Congress, quote, informally, of an $8 billion proposed arms deal with Israel that includes munitions for fighter jets and attack helicopters, as well as artillery shells. Author Barak Ravid, who serves as an official spokesman for Washington and Tel Aviv. And so in this case, if he's saying that Israel didn't commit a certain war crime, I would be highly suspect about what he's saying, because often what he says as an IDF veteran is meant to protect the IDF. Other times, his reporting is, I think, very accurate and early because he is so connected with the U.S. and Israeli government. When they're announcing something, they'll announce it through Barak Ravid. So he did not define what it meant to be what it means to informally notify Congress of a weapons sale. The White House is required to notify Congress of all weapons sales, I think a month before they happen, which is supposed to give the Senate time to evaluate the sale and then vote for or against it. Of course, they never vote against sales, particularly to Israel. And so, it's all kind of an informal progress, but I am curious as to what it means that the White House notify Congress informally, and if that does meet the requirements under law of notifying Congress. So the massive arms sale to Tel Aviv comes after Amnesty International declared Israel's onslaught in Gaza a genocide. So a report released in early December explained Amnesty International's research has found sufficient basis to conclude that Israel has committed and is continuing to commit genocide against Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip, the organization said in a landmark new report. So the sale to Israel includes AIM 120C-8 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles, Hellfire AGM-114 missiles, and 155 millimeter artillery rounds, small diameter bombs, JDAM kits, and 500-pound bombs. Many of these munitions have been used by Israel during its campaign of extermination in Gaza, including in attacks on civilian targets. In June, CNN reported that Israel used U.S. small diameter bombs in an attack on a school that killed 40 civilians. In October, the Washington Post noted the Biden administration has received nearly 500 reports alleging Israel used U.S. supplied weapons for attacks that cause unnecessary harm to civilians in the Gaza Strip. Amnesty International is calling on the U.S. and other states that provide Israel with arms to cut off the flow of weapons to stop the genocide. So Angus Callanard, the Secretary General of Amnesty International, explained, states that continue to transfer arms to Israel at this time must know that they are violating their obligation to prevent genocide and are at risk of becoming complicit in genocide. All states with influence over Israel, particularly key arms suppliers like the US and Germany, but also other EU members like the UK, must now act to bring Israel's atrocities against the Palestinians in Gaza to an immediate end. Israel receives most of its weapons, 78%, from the U.S., and officials in Tel Aviv have acknowledged it would not be able to sustain its military operations without continued U.S. support for more than a few months. Since the October 7th attack, the U.S. has provided Israel with $22 billion in military aid, and so this will likely ratchet that number up to over $1 billion, not million. Still, Biden has been routinely criticized by Republicans in Washington and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not providing Israel with enough military support. The Axios report that some munitions will come directly from U.S. stockpiles. However, many of the weapons will not be delivered until years into the future. The goal of the deal, according to one official, is supporting Israel's long-term security by resupplying stocks of critical munitions and air defense capabilities. So another massive arms sale to Israel, and this comes as the New York Times is reporting that UNRWA is preparing for Israel to shut down aid distribution in Gaza and the West Bank. So after Israel passed a series of laws targeting the UN's Palestinian Aid Agency, that's UNRWA, the organization is now planning to terminate its operations in the occupied territories. Officials are warning that Tel Aviv's shuttering of UNRWA will have catastrophic consequences for the millions of civilians who rely on their support. So on Thursday, the New York Times explained, if Israeli authorities enforce the new laws, UN officials are warning that no other group will be able to replace UNRWA and its critical humanitarian humanitarian operations in Gaza will grind to a halt at a moment when experts say famine is threatening parts of the territory. The report adds UN officials say they are preparing to shutter UNRWA operations in both Gaza and the Israeli-occupied West Bank. UNRWA was established in 1949 following the Nakba, or the creation of the Israeli state, that left hundreds of thousands of Palestinians ethnically cleansed from their villages and forced into refugee camps. Since October 7, 2023, UNRWA has served as the main lifeline for millions of Palestinians in Gaza who are displaced from their homes and on the brink of starvation. As Haaretz explained, in Gaza, UNRWA is the only organization with the manpower and infrastructure to provide humanitarian and medical aid along with essential services. Top Israeli officials have demanded a full end to the aid transfers to Gaza, putting Tel Aviv at odds with UNRWA. After Israel released a series of unproven allegations that UNRWA was involved in the October 7th attack, the Knesset passed laws that effectively banned the agency. The ban on UNRWA is scheduled to take effect later this month. So Jamie McGoldrick, a former UN official who oversaw aid distribution in Gaza and the West Bank up until April, said it would have a massive impact on already catastrophic situation. If that is what the Israeli intention is, to remove any ability to save lives, you have to question what the thinking and what is the end goal. While the Biden administration has asked Israel not to enforce the ban on UNRWA, Tel Aviv has routinely ignored the White House's demands to allow more aid into Gaza. During that period where Tel Aviv was openly defying Washington's command, the U.S. has provided Israel with $22 billion in military aid. And there's this really interesting thing going on right now. As the Biden administration and all of its staffers prepare to exit, they're all trying to work on their reputation and kind of craft the narrative around the Biden presidency. And one of the things I see a lot of is these officials trying to convince us that no, we did not aid a genocide. We saved the Palestinian people. Israel wanted to allow no aid into the Gaza Strip, and we forced them to allow in like 50 trucks a day. So yeah, we saved so many people, and that's really what they're celebrating. And it's absolutely baffling because without the U.S. support, of course, none of this could even be happening. But we give them our support that allows them to conduct this genocide, and then we have them crank the genocide down from 100 to a 95 and celebrate like we prevent the whole genocide that we're actually allowing to happen in the first place. While absolutely insane, that's what is going on with U.S. policy right now. All right, so let's talk about the flow of aid into Gaza, because apparently it's going to get even worse in a couple weeks here. This one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israel considering cutting aid to Gaza even more under Trump. So Israel is considering limiting humanitarian aid deliveries into Gaza even more once President-elect Donald Trump is inaugurated on January 20th, CNN reported on Saturday, citing Israeli officials. In recent months, the amount of aid entering Gaza has reached an all-time low, as the Israeli military has been conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza that involves a total siege, which started in early October. The Biden administration claimed it was concerned about the aid restrictions and gave Israel a 30-day time limit to allow 350 trucks to enter the strip per day. When that deadline came in November, Israel was not anywhere near that number, but the Biden administration said there would be no consequences, and U.S. weapons shipments to Israel continued to flow. The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OSHA, said that 2,205 aid trucks entered Gaza in December, about 71 per day. The Israeli officials speaking to CNN claimed the purpose of limiting aid even more would be to deprive Hamas of resources. Although armed gangs have been looting aid trucks due to a lack of security, even then, it's actually, they do have security. The gangs that are looting the trucks are getting security from the IDF, from the Israeli soldiers, and the former police force of Gaza has been decimated and destroyed and murdered by Israel, and so now there's no one to protect the trucks from the looters. So, a journalist for Israel's Channel 12 reported last month that Trump has sent a message to Israel suggesting that he won't care about further aid restrictions despite warnings of famine. The journalist wrote on X on December 22nd, Trump sent messages to Israel. I won't insist on humanitarian aid as Biden did. Israel initially imposed a total siege on Gaza in the aftermath of the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel. So, Defense Minister at the time, Yoav Gallant, said on October 9, 2023, I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. According to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, has taken credit for getting the Israeli government to agree to allow some aid into Gaza. This is what I'm talking about. They're celebrating the minimal amount of aid that they've actually have gotten into the strip. So this should be a big concern that the aid is going to be restricted even more after Trump takes office. All right. Next up here is this article that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 5th. Israel rushes soldier out of Brazil to avoid war crimes investigation. So an Israeli soldier was immediately evacuated from Brazil by the country's embassy after a Brazilian court proposed investigating the man for committing war crimes. In response, Tel Aviv instructed its soldiers to be careful about what they post on social media. So the Hind Rajib Foundation filed a complaint that an Israeli soldier who entered Brazil had committed war crimes. On Saturday, it was confirmed that a court opened an investigation. The foundation said that the soldier posted videos to social media where he destroyed Palestinian homes. The HRF accused the soldier of participating in massive demolitions of civilian homes in Gaza during a systematic campaign of destruction, adding these acts are part of the broader effort to impose unbearable living conditions on Palestinian civilians, constituting genocide and crimes against humanity under international law. So following the opening in the inquiry, Israel helped move the man from Brazil to Argentina, and Tel Aviv told its soldiers to be careful what they post online. Now, this is interesting because Israeli soldiers for the past 15 months have been posting videos online. I would say the majority of them are videos of them engaging in looting and home destructions of Palestinians, but all kinds of different acts and war crimes, including some that showed Israeli soldiers either torturing or preparing to torture Palestinians, and just all kinds of gruesome videos. And Tel Aviv has not instructed its soldiers to take these videos down. I think in part Tel Aviv sees these videos as important as creating a culture of genocide, right? It's very difficult to get all of your soldiers to go out and want to kill and not care about Palestinian civilians. When they're running them down in their tanks and Humvees by the hundreds, when they're mowing people down in bread lines waiting for food, when they're dropping bombs on homes full of families. Some people, even Israelis, are going to feel bad about that, right? Even soldiers in the military are opposed to killing innocent civilians. And so you have to indoctrinate and create this culture where the Palestinian lives are worth absolutely less than the life of a rat or anything else, right? We have these reports in Gaza where Israeli soldiers, and these are reports from Israeli soldiers, by the way, these aren't Palestinians saying this, these are Israeli soldiers saying this, that they are shooting innocent Palestinian civilians and allowing the bodies to be eaten by stray dogs and cats. And they don't kill the stray dogs and cats. And so it's not like they're just on a murder rampage. It's that they are, have dehumanized the Palestinians to the point that, they'll do this even to innocent children, just kill them and let their bodies be fed on by dogs. And so my guess is that's why Israel has not really cracked down on soldiers posting obvious war crimes online, even if it hurts Tel Aviv's reputation, the global eye, because again, I think they recognize that needs to be the Israeli culture to accomplish what Israeli leaders want to accomplish, which is genocide, ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Now, they are pulling back on that because I guess the one thing you probably want less for your military than to have a conscience is for them to start getting arrested whenever they travel abroad, because, that might prompt some people to try to avoid military service or not to join the military. So I think, that's kind of the thinking here from the Israeli side. Israeli leaders Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant are wanted by the International Criminal Court for their role in ordering an extermination campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid slammed Netanyahu over the incident in Brazil. He said, "The fact that an Israeli reservist was forced to flee Brazil in the dead of night to avoid being arrested for fighting in Gaza is a huge political failure by an irresponsible government that simply does not know how to work. It cannot be that IDF soldiers, both regular and reservists, are afraid to go on trips abroad for fear of being arrested." And this is the Israeli opposition, right? And so it's important to note that he's not saying we shouldn't be fighting the war in Gaza because look what's happened now. Our soldiers are wanted war criminals all over the world. He's saying that Netanyahu's inability to conduct global diplomacy has created a situation where Israeli soldiers are now being targeted. But those two things aren't the same. The problem isn't the war from Yair Lapid's standpoint. The problem is Netanyahu's ability to conduct diplomacy. So efforts to prosecute Israeli leaders and soldiers come amid significant declines in Israel's public image as people around the world have been repulsed by the 15-month-long genocide being committed in Gaza. The Hind Rajib Foundation was named after a 5-year-old Palestinian girl who was gunned down along with several family members and paramedics after pleading for help with emergency services. And there's these, just heartbreaking calls where, I don't speak the same language as her, but from the translations you could hear a little girl's voice and a pleading for help, pleading again and again and again. And as this help is set to come, the Israelis open up fire one more time, killing her and the paramedics trying to save her after she watched her entire family die and bleed out. There is no reason for it. They weren't militants. The Israelis just are thinning the population of Gaza. And so this is happening on a daily basis, and it's getting worse and more horrific almost every single day. So this article here, Israel attack kills 88 Palestinians in Gaza over 24 hours. Gaza's health ministry said Sunday that Israeli attacks have killed at least 88 Palestinians and wounded 208 more. Israel has stepped up its bombing of the besieged enclave in recent days. Al Jazeera reported on Sunday. Notice, Israel is stepping up its massive bombing campaign of Gaza at a time when the Biden administration is going to sell them $8 billion worth of bombs, missiles, and artillery shells. So maybe Israel feels like they could step up attacks because they know that they have a lot more coming from Washington. So Al Jazeera reported, "We are seeing women and children making up the vast majority of casualties." And so going on here on, also on Sunday, an 8th Palestinian baby died of hypothermia due to exposure from living in a tent. The baby's mother said, "He died because of very cold weather. He slept next to me in the morning and I have found him frozen to death. I don't know what to say." And again, this is the eighth, 8 babies in the past week have frozen to death in Gaza. It's unimaginable. It's sickening. It's horrific. I hate talking about it. The only thing I really want to add on this to highlight it is one of the reasons this is apparently happening is there's a lot of Palestinians who have been living in tents in Gaza for a year or, close to a year now. And so these tents exposed to daily weather conditions and everything are wearing out. They have holes in them. The water is getting in when it rains. When it floods, the water's coming up from the floor. And so it's a horrific situation. It's an absolutely horrific situation imposed on the people of Gaza by the Israeli government. If the Biden administration want the Israelis to allow more tents, and they would say, if you want a single bomb, you got to give the people new tents. But they're not doing that, or anything. at all to help the people of Gaza, to get Israel to curtail its bombing campaign or anything. All we're doing is aiding and funding this genocide that is now seeing children, babies, starve to death as they sleep next to their mothers in the middle of the night. So Israeli strikes on Sunday included a drone strike near the southern city of Khan Yunis that killed 5 Palestinians. The Palestinian news agency Wafa that reported that additional 9 Palestinians were killed by Israeli shelling in central and northern Gaza. Since Thursday, Israel has significantly stepped up its attacks on the Gaza government, which includes Gaza City, raising fears that the Israeli military is moving its ethnic cleansing campaign, known as the General's Plan, further south. Since early October, the IDF has been conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign in the northern governance, which includes the cities of Bet Lehiah, Bet Hanun, and Jabalia. The campaign involved a total siege and orders for all civilians to leave under threats of death, whether by bombing, shooting, or starvation. IDF soldiers have also been demolishing every building in sight, so civilians have nowhere to return to. The general's plan aims to cleanse all Palestinians from North Gaza and the Gaza government, so none can remain north of the Nazarene Corridor, a strip of land where the IDF has demolished most buildings and established military bases. Completing the ethnic cleansing will likely pave the way for the establishment of Jewish settlements in northern Gaza. Wafa reported that 45 Palestinians were killed by Israeli attacks in the North Gaza governance on Saturday. Gaza's health ministry said Sunday that the latest violence brought the death toll since October 2023 to 45,805 and the number of wounded to over 109,000. The ministry's numbers don't include the thousands of Palestinians missing and presumed dead under the rubble or indirect death caused by the U.S.-backed Israeli siege. And of course, the number of dead is far, far higher, well into the hundreds of thousands, according to an estimate by American doctors. All right. Just a few more articles here, Middle East news that I want to touch on before we wrap up. This one from Jason Ditz. As Israel flouts Lebanon ceasefire, defense minister says deal may be scrapped entirely. So with just a few weeks left in the 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, it seems increasingly that not only will the war resume after that, but the ceasefire may not last, even in pretense, for the whole 60 days. Israel continues to commit dozens of violations daily, attacking southern Lebanon and invading new towns that they hadn't occupied during the war itself. So 2 more towns were taken by IDF troops. Ironically, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz is claiming that the main ceasefire threat is that Hezbollah is not fulfilling its requirements and that Israel will be forced to act. Since they keep attacking targets in Lebanon throughout this ceasefire, it's not clear what would actually change beyond rhetoric. It's increasingly likely that Israel won't leave Lebanon within the 60 days, and indeed, it is being reported that Israel intends to inform the U.S. of its intentions to stay in Lebanon past the deadline. They will also inform the U.S. that they've decided that the Lebanese civilians cannot be allowed to return to the border villages. Israel has been demolishing towns and villages in the border area and has warned civilians to stay out. Israeli violations of the ceasefire have persisted throughout the past, about 45 days of ceasefire. Within just hours of the ceasefire taking effect, Israeli troops are shooting at Lebanese journalists in one city. The violations are larger and more flagrant these days. UNIFIL peacekeepers, which is the UN peacekeeping mission in the area, have issued statements slamming Israel for flagrant violations of the ceasefire this weekend, noting that Israeli military bulldozers demolished UN property, including a UNIFIL observation post and one of the barrels located near Labruth. The barrels were put there specifically to mark a line which Israel was supposed to withdraw its forces by 60 days. And so they're basically just, symbolically trampling over the ceasefire with their bulldozers. All right, this one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, January 5th. Video surfaces of Syria's new justice minister overseeing the execution of women in 2015. This is absolutely horrific. So the new justice minister, not defense minister, justice minister of Syria, this is the man Jolani appointed, Shadad al-Wasai, was overseeing the execution of 2 women in 2015. It's absolutely horrific. They say that they were guilty of prostitution, and it's just, that this woman is pleading to see her children one last time, and then he orders her execution, and she is murdered on the street. All right, I think that does it for the show today. Everybody, thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, I will have another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show out today, so don't forget to subscribe to that channel. Thank you all so much. Back with more episodes of Conflicts of Interest later in the week.